One prophet, 450 priests, a nation watching, and a God about to prove that numbers mean nothing when you're standing on the wrong side of truth. On a windswept mountain in ancient Israel, the most lopsided spiritual showdown in history was about to go down. And what happened next would shatter everything the crowd thought they knew about power, faith, and the God who answers by fire. Think about those odds for a second. 450 trained religious professionals, backed by the Queen, funded by the palace, supported by the establishment, against one man. One voice, one prayer. If you ran those numbers through any military calculator, any political analysis, any reasonable assessment of the situation, the lone prophet doesn't stand a chance. He should be destroyed, humiliated, erased from history. But by sunset, those 450 would be dead. The nation would be on its knees, and rain would break a 3-year drought that had brought an empire to its knees. This is the story of Mount Carmel. The day heaven came to earth with such force that even the stones melted. The moment when one man's faith proved more powerful than an army of pretenders. But to understand why this confrontation was necessary, why it was so dramatic, and why it still matters today, you need to understand the darkness that had swallowed Israel whole. The year was somewhere around 860 BCE. The northern kingdom of Israel, 10 tribes strong, sat at a crossroads of ancient trade routes. Wealth flowed through its cities. Its armies were formidable. Its king, Ahab, had established political alliances that made Israel a regional power. On paper, the kingdom was thriving. But beneath the surface, something had rotted to the core. Ahab had done what so many rulers before him had done. He'd married for politics. His wife, Jezebel, was a Phoenician princess from Sidon. Beautiful, intelligent, ruthlessly ambitious. She brought wealth and alliance. But she also brought something else. Her gods. Baal, the storm god, the fertility deity the Phoenicians worshipped with rituals that would make your skin crawl. Asherah, the mother goddess, whose worship involved temple prostitution and practices that violated everything the God of Israel stood for. Here's what most people miss about this period. This wasn't just about adding some foreign gods to the mix. This was systematic replacement. Jezebel didn't want tolerance. She wanted total conversion. The prophets of the Lord, those who spoke for the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, were being hunted down and executed. We're talking about state-sponsored religious persecution on a massive scale. 1 Kings chapter 18 tells us that Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets. A man named Obadiah, who managed Ahab's palace, had hidden 100 prophets in caves, feeding them bread and water just to keep them alive. The worship of Yahweh, the God who'd brought Israel out of Egypt, who'd given them the promised land, who'd made them a nation, was being systematically erased. And Ahab, the king who should have been defending his nation's covenant with God, he was going along with it, building temples to Baal, supporting his wife's religious crusade, leading his people into spiritual adultery. But here's where it gets even darker. This wasn't just about which deity got which temple. Baal worship was fundamentally about control. In ancient Near Eastern religion, Baal was the god of storms, of rain, of fertility. If you wanted your crops to grow, your livestock to multiply, your nation to prosper, you worshipped Baal. You performed the rituals, you made the sacrifices, and the storm god would bless you with rain. The entire economic and agricultural system of Israel depended on seasonal rains. No rain meant no crops. No crops meant no food. No food meant death. So when the priests of Baal said, "Worship our God and the rain will come," they held the nation's survival in their hands. Or so they claimed. Enter Elijah. We don't know much about his background. The text introduces him abruptly in 1 Kings chapter 17. Elijah the Tishbite, from Tishbe in Gilead. A nobody from nowhere. No royal lineage. No prestigious position. just a prophet, a man who heard from God. And the first thing Elijah does is walk straight into Ahab's throne room and deliver the most audacious message imaginable. As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years, except at my word. Think about the sheer boldness of that statement. You're challenging the core claim of Baal worship. You're saying that the God of Israel, not the Phoenician storm god, controls the weather. You're predicting a drought that will devastate the economy. And you're telling the king to his face that God is judging him. Ahab must have thought Elijah was insane. But the sky stopped giving rain. Month after month, the clouds disappeared. The seasonal rains failed. Streams dried up. Crops withered. Livestock died. The famine spread across Israel, then into surrounding nations. 3 years. 3 years of relentless drought. And every single day, the prophets of Baal performed their rituals, called on their god, promised that the rain was coming. But the sky remained bronze. The ground turned to iron. Nothing grew. The Bible tells us that the drought was so severe that even Ahab was personally searching for grass to keep his horses alive. This wasn't just uncomfortable. This was existential threat-level crisis. Here's what the drought proved. Baal was silent, powerless, non-existent. The storm god couldn't bring storms. The fertility deity couldn't make anything fertile. For 3 years, every day without rain was another day proving that the prophets of Baal were frauds, that their elaborate rituals were meaningless, that their god was nothing but carved wood and human imagination. And somewhere, hidden by God's command, sustained by ravens and a widow's miraculous supply of flour and oil, Elijah waited. Because God wasn't just punishing Israel, He was setting the stage for a confrontation that would demonstrate His power so dramatically, so undeniably, that no one could miss it. The drought wasn't the punishment. It was the prelude. In the 3rd year of the drought, God told Elijah it was time. Go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land. But there would be conditions. There would be a test. There would be proof that would silence every question about who the real God was. Elijah left his hiding place and started the journey toward Samaria, toward the king who wanted him dead, toward a confrontation that would change Israel's history forever. On his way, he met Obadiah, Ahab's palace manager, the man who'd been hiding prophets in caves. When Obadiah recognized Elijah, he nearly collapsed with fear. "You want me to tell Ahab you're here? He'll kill me. He's been searching every nation and kingdom for you. He's made rulers swear they haven't seen you. If I tell him you're here and you disappear again, I'm dead." But Elijah's response carried the weight of divine appointment. "As the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab today." Obadiah delivered the message, and when Ahab saw Elijah, the king's first words dripped with contempt and accusation. "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" In Ahab's mind, Elijah was the problem. This prophet had pronounced drought. This prophet had caused the famine. This prophet was troubling Israel. It's a fascinating psychological reversal. The man leading Israel into apostasy, into covenant violation, into spiritual adultery, saw the prophet calling him to account as the troublemaker. But Elijah didn't back down. His response cut through the king's delusion like a blade. "I have not made trouble for Israel, but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals." Then came the challenge, the moment everything had been building toward. Elijah gave Ahab an order. Yes, a prophet giving orders to a king. "Summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." This was it. Public demonstration. Verifiable test, national audience, no ambiguity, No excuses. God versus Baal, with the entire nation watching. Ahab could have refused. He could have arrested Elijah on the spot. But something in the prophet's authority, or maybe desperation for the drought to end, made him comply. The summons went out across Israel. Come to Mount Carmel. Bring the prophets. Bring the people. We're settling this once and for all. Mount Carmel was the perfect location for this showdown. A mountain ridge running along the Mediterranean coast, its western slopes catching moisture from the sea. In normal times, Carmel was green, fertile, a stark contrast to the surrounding areas. But after 3 years of drought, even Carmel was brown and dead. The mountain had religious significance too. It had been a place of worship for the Lord, with altars built there in earlier generations. But those altars had fallen into disrepair during the Baal worship era. And here's the geographic irony that makes this perfect. Mount Carmel overlooks the Kishon Valley, and beyond that, you can see the Mediterranean Sea. Baal was supposedly the god of storms that came from the sea. If there was any place his prophets should have power, it was here, in sight of the source of rain clouds. As the day arrived, the crowds gathered. Imagine the scene. Thousands of Israelites climbing the mountain paths. The 450 prophets of Baal, probably wearing their religious regalia, confident in their numbers, in their training, in their establishment backing. And one man, Elijah, standing alone. When everyone had assembled, Elijah addressed the crowd with words that cut straight to the heart of Israel's spiritual crisis. How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. The people said nothing. Silence. That silence tells you everything about Israel's condition. They weren't committed to Baal. They weren't committed to God. They were trying to play both sides. Keep the Lord happy with occasional sacrifices. Keep Baal happy with the popular worship. Hedge their bets. Have it both ways. But Elijah forced the issue. You cannot serve both. Choose. Then he laid out the challenge with stark clarity. I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophets choose one for themselves, and let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is God. The crowd's response was immediate and unanimous. What you say is good. Perfect test. Clear conditions. Undeniable result. No tricks. No ambiguity. Whichever God sent fire to consume the sacrifice, that God was real. That God was worthy of worship. The prophets of Baal accepted. Why wouldn't they? They had 450 men. Elijah stood alone. They had royal support, years of training, elaborate rituals. Elijah had nothing but his word and his God. The odds couldn't have been more in their favor. The prophets of Baal went first. They took the bull, prepared it according to ritual specifications, laid it on the wood. Then they began calling on Baal. The text tells us they called from morning until noon. That's at least 6 hours of continuous ritual. O Baal, answer us. O Baal, answer us. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. Picture the scene. 450 priests, probably working in shifts, maintaining the ritual prayers, the ceremonial dances, the invocations. This wasn't quiet. Prayer. This was loud, public, demonstrative religion, dancing around the altar they'd made, performing the traditional Baal worship rituals they'd done hundreds of times before. But the wood didn't ignite. The sacrifice didn't burn. The sky remained silent. At noon, after 6 hours of failure, Elijah started mocking them. His words drip with sarcasm that would make a modern comedian proud. Shout louder. Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought or busy or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened. The Hebrew text is even more biting than most translations capture. The phrase about being busy or traveling can be read as he's relieving himself. Elijah was suggesting that maybe Baal was in the bathroom. He's telling these prophets their God is either powerless or literally indisposed. Mock away at the deity they'd spent their lives serving. And here's what makes this even more devastating. Elijah wasn't just confident. He was leisurely, casual. While these prophets were working themselves into a frenzy, he's making jokes. That's the confidence of a man who knows the outcome before it happens. The mockery worked. It drove the prophets to escalation. They shouted louder and cut themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed. This is important to understand. Bloodletting wasn't unusual in Baal worship. It was standard practice. The idea was that spilling your own blood showed devotion, showed sacrifice, showed you were serious. It was supposed to get the gods' attention. So these priests, desperate now, humiliated by Elijah's mockery, aware of the watching crowd, began cutting themselves. 450 men slicing their own flesh with blades, blood streaming down their bodies, screaming prayers to a God who wasn't there. The scene must have been absolutely horrific. The smell of blood in the hot sun, the screams of men inflicting pain on themselves, the desperation in their voices as hours passed and nothing happened. The text tells us midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice. That means they kept going for another 3 hours at least. 9 hours total. 9 hours of calling, dancing, bleeding, begging. But the text gives us the crushing verdict. There was no response, no one answered, no one paid attention. The silence from heaven was absolute. Baal had nothing to say because Baal didn't exist. At some point during those 9 hours, the prophets of Baal had to know, had to feel the dawning horror that their God wasn't going to answer, that all their training, all their rituals, all their blood, all their screaming meant nothing, that they were priests of an empty religion, servants of a deity that never existed. The crowd was watching, the king was watching, and their God remained stone silent. When the time for the evening sacrifice came, Elijah finally stepped forward. His turn. But before he did anything else, he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. This detail matters. There had been an altar to God on this mountain. Previous generations of faithful Israelites had worshipped here, but it had been destroyed, probably during Jezebel's purge of Yahweh worship. Elijah's first act was restoration, rebuilding what had been broken. He took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob. Even though the kingdom was divided, even though 10 tribes followed Ahab in the north and 2 followed Judah in the south, Elijah's altar represented the whole nation. All 12 tribes, united under one God. This wasn't just about winning a contest. It was about calling Israel back to its identity, its covenant, its true self as God's chosen people. With the stones, he built an altar in the name of the Lord. Then he dug a trench around it, large enough to hold about 15 liters of water. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Standard sacrifice preparation. But then Elijah did something that made an already impossible situation completely absurd. He commanded, "Fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and on the wood." They did it. Then he said, "Do it again." They did it again. Then he said, "Do it a 3rd time." They did it a 3rd time. Stop and think about what's happening here. Israel is in the 3rd year of a catastrophic drought. Water is precious. Every drop matters. And Elijah is dumping it on an altar. Not just a little bit. 12 large jars worth, 36 jars total. Enough that the water ran down around the altar and even filled the trench. Here's why this is genius. Elijah eliminated every possible explanation except divine intervention. No hidden fire, no trickery, no natural ignition. The wood was soaked, the sacrifice was soaked, even the stones were soaked, and there was a moat of water surrounding everything. If fire consumed this, there could be no rational explanation. No claiming he'd used some clever technique, no suggesting natural phenomena. Either God answered or it couldn't happen. Period. The crowd must have thought he'd lost his mind. The prophets of Baal certainly thought so. You just made it impossible for yourself. You've guaranteed failure. Good luck burning water-soaked wood with prayer. But Elijah stepped up to the altar. After 9 hours of screaming and blood and frenzy, after watching 450 men work themselves into exhaustion, Elijah prayed. And his prayer was nothing like what had come before. No screaming, no dancing, no cutting, no hysteria. Just words, simple, direct, powerful. Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. That's it. That's the whole prayer, maybe 30 seconds. Compare that to 9 hours. Compare that to blood sacrifice and self-mutilation. Compare that to the elaborate rituals and desperate invocations. Elijah just talked to God like a servant talking to his master. Because that's exactly what it was. And then, in the most dramatic divine response in human history, the fire of the Lord fell. Not just a little flame, not a spark that caught the wood. The fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the soil, and licked up the water in the trench. Read that again slowly. The sacrifice burned, which you'd expect. The wood burned, obviously, but the stones burned. Stone doesn't burn. Stone melts at temperatures around 2500 degrees Celsius. This wasn't normal fire. This was consuming fire that destroyed everything it touched. The soil burned, vaporized. The water didn't just evaporate. The text says it was licked up, consumed like fuel. This was fire from heaven that defied physics, that obliterated everything, that left nothing but burned ground and awestruck witnesses. The people's response was immediate and total. They fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." Not Baal, not Asherah, not the pantheon of Phoenician deities. The Lord, Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who brought Israel out of Egypt, the God who'd been calling them back for 3 years through drought, that God, the real God, the only God. But the confrontation wasn't over. Justice was coming. Elijah commanded, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let anyone get away." They seized them, all 450, and Elijah had them brought down to the Kishon Valley. There, by the brook that had been dry for 3 years, Elijah slaughtered them, every single one. This shocks modern sensibilities. Mass execution seems brutal, extreme, excessive. But you have to understand the context. These weren't just religious leaders with different views. Under God's law given to Moses, those who led Israel into idolatry were to be put to death. They had corrupted the nation. They had led people away from the true God. They had participated in rituals that included child sacrifice, temple prostitution, and abominations that violated human dignity. This wasn't religious persecution. This was executing justice according to the law Israel had agreed to at Sinai. The prophets of Baal knew the stakes. They'd chosen to challenge the God of Israel. They'd lost. And under that covenant, the penalty was death. It was harsh. It was final. But it was the standard they themselves had accepted by living in Israel and opposing its God. With the false prophets executed, Elijah turned to Ahab with the most casual weather prediction in history. "Go, eat and drink, for there is the sound of heavy rain." Ahab went off to eat and drink, because apparently, after watching fire from heaven and mass execution, the king needed a meal. But Elijah climbed to the top of Carmel, not to rest, not to celebrate, to pray. He bent down to the ground and put his face between his knees. Posture of intense intercession. And he sent his servant to look toward the sea. Go and look toward the sea. The servant went up and looked. There is nothing there. 7 times Elijah sent him. 6 times the servant reported nothing. But the 7th time the servant came back with different news. A cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea. After 3 years of empty sky, after 9 hours of Baal's silence, after fire from heaven, the rain was finally coming. Elijah told his servant to warn Ahab, "Go and tell Ahab, hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you." And then the text gives us one of the most amazing details. Meanwhile, the sky grew black with clouds, the wind rose, a heavy rain started falling, and Ahab rode off to Jezreel. But the power of the Lord came on Elijah, and, tucking his cloak into his belt, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. This is roughly a 16-mile run. Elijah, after a day of intense confrontation, after praying for rain, outran a team of royal horses. It defies physiology. It defies logic. A man who hasn't eaten, physically exhausted from a spiritual war, sprinting 16 miles through mud and storm to beat a chariot to the city gates. This wasn't adrenaline. This was the hand of the Lord. It was the final exclamation point on the day's sentence, proving God's prophet was not just spiritually superior to the king, but physically empowered by the force that ignited the mountain. As Ahab's wheels churned through the sludge, he looked out to see Elijah, a wild, cloak-wrapped ghost in the storm, leading the way to Jezreel. The war was won, the drought was broken, the idols were ash. But here is where the story takes a turn, as shocking as the fire itself. You expect a victory parade. You expect a national revival. Instead, you get a psychological crash. Ahab arrived at the palace and went straight to Jezebel. Listen to his report. He told her everything Elijah had done and how he had killed the prophets. Not what God did, what Elijah did. Ahab reduced the miraculous to the actions of a man, and he focused on the one thing guaranteed to trigger his wife, the slaughter of her payroll. Jezebel didn't panic. She didn't pack. She sent a messenger to Elijah with a death warrant signed in her gods' names. "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." It was a masterclass in intimidation. She invoked the very gods Elijah had just exposed as frauds to promise his death. It was a bluff, a psychological strike, but it landed with devastating precision. Elijah, the man who stood fearlessly before 450 priests and a king, crumbled. The text says simply, Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. How do you go from calling down fire to running from an angry woman in 24 hours? It's a vulnerability hangover. When you expend every ounce of spiritual and physical energy, you are left hollow. Elijah had nothing left. He expected a revolution. He got a hit contract. He ran to Beersheba, the edge of civilization, left his servant, and walked a day into the wilderness. He collapsed under a broom bush and prayed to die. "I have had enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." Listen to the despair. "I am no better than my ancestors." He thought he was the one to break the cycle. Now he felt like a failure. This is the prophet of fire, curled in the dust, suicidal. It's a profound comfort to anyone who has ever done the right thing and suffered for it. Even giants break. God's response is fascinatingly practical. No thunderbolts, no theology lectures. He sent an angel with a menu. Get up and eat. Baked bread and water. Elijah ate, slept, and the angel woke him again. Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. God recognized the physical root of the spiritual crisis. The prophet didn't need a sermon. He needed carbs and a nap. Strengthened by that food, Elijah traveled 40 days to Horeb. the mountain of God. He went back to Sinai where the covenant began to tell God that the covenant was dead. He found a cave, and there the word of the Lord came. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Elijah gave his rehearsed speech. "I have been very zealous. The Israelites have rejected you. I am the only one left, and they are trying to kill me." It was a speech of isolation. He believed he was the singular target of the world's darkness. So God told him to stand on the mountain for a lesson in theology. A great wind tore the mountains apart, but the Lord was not in the wind. An earthquake shook the foundations, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. A fire roared through, but the Lord was not in the fire. This is the correction. Elijah was the prophet of fire. He associated God with the spectacular. But after the fire came a gentle whisper, the sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard that, he pulled his cloak over his face. He knew the wind and fire were just the entourage. The king was in the whisper. God repeated the question. Elijah repeated his complaint. "I am the only one left." So God gave him a new roadmap. Go back, anoint Hazael king over Aram, anoint Jehu king over Israel, anoint Elisha to succeed you. God was saying, you are not done, but you are not alone. And then the math check that shattered Elijah's victimhood. Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, whose knees have not bowed to Baal. You think you're a solo act? You're wrong by a margin of 7,000. Elijah left the mountain with a new purpose. He wasn't just a prophet of judgment anymore. He was a mentor. He found Elisha plowing a field, a wealthy man with 12 yoke of oxen, and threw his cloak over him. It was a draft notice. Elisha understood. He kissed his parents, slaughtered his oxen, burned his plowing equipment to cook the meat, and fed the people. He burned the ships. He destroyed his career to follow the wild prophet. The work would continue. The story ends not with death, but with a whirlwind. Years later, walking by the Jordan with Elisha, the time came. A chariot of fire appeared, separating the two men, and Elijah went up to heaven. He is one of only 2 men in Scripture to bypass the grave. Elisha, picking up the fallen cloak, struck the water and cried, "Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" The water parted. The Spirit had transferred. The story of Mount Carmel isn't just about a contest of gods. It's a deconstruction of power. Ahab had the crown, Jezebel had the threats, and Baal had the numbers. But numbers mean nothing when you stand on the wrong side of truth. Elijah's life proves that one person plus God is always a majority. The fire proved God exists. The whisper proved God cares. And in the space between the fire and the whisper, Elijah found what we all search for: the strength to endure when the adrenaline fades, and the assurance that even when we feel like the only one left, God has a remnant, and He is never silent.